where the hell did this pimple come from? Do you know why there's a pimple on my face? That's cause you did not subscribe. And if you want this pimple to disappear, subscribe. And if you don't want this pimple to disappear, still subscribe. I'm waiting. Click that button. Alright, so we are done with connective tissue proper. Now it's time for specialized connective tissue. Under connective tissue proper, we saw areolar connective tissue, adipose connective tissue, white fibrous connective tissue, and finally yellow fibrous connective tissue. So now it's turn for specialized connective tissue. Specialized connective tissue contains the word specialized because the tissue is special or different. How? This is how. So in case of connective tissue proper, the tissue was proper. That means it contained all the basic features or the typical characters or typical connective tissue is expected to have. That is, it had cells, fibers, and those cells and fibers were present on the matrix. However, in case of specialized connective tissue, it is not necessary that it contains all three cells, fibers, and your matrix. That is, it is special in some way. For example, in case of blood, there are no fibers, yet it is a fluid connective tissue. So it's special, right? That's why it's kept under the topic of specialized connective tissue. Under specialized connective tissue, today we're going to deal with bones. Okay, under specialized connective tissue, there are various types. Among those types, one is skeletal tissue. Under skeletal tissue, we have bones and cartilage. Today we are going to deal with bone. So bone is kept under skeletal tissue because it forms the skeletal system of human body. Duh. Okay, so before we look at the types of bony tissue or the types of bone, which includes compact bone and spongy bone, first let's look at the structure of a long bone. A long bone is named so because it is long, that's why. Okay, let's look at a diagram of long bone. So a typical long bone consists two parts. So suppose this is your long bone. At the two ends of the long bone, there are knob-like structure. One at the top and other at the bottom. In the middle, there is the shaft. The knob of the long bones, the two knobs of the long bones, they are known as epiphysis. While the shaft in the middle is known as diaphysis. Then there are two lines. One line here and the other line here. The line, they separate the epiphysis from diaphysis. And these two lines are known as epiphyseal lines. So what does epiphyseal line do? They separate epiphysis from diaphysis. Inside your long bone, there's a cavity which is known as bone marrow cavity, which is found throughout your long bone. Depending on where that bone marrow cavity is in your long bone, it either contains red bone marrow or yellow bone marrow. So the bone marrow cavity in the diaphysis. So this is the shaft. There is a cavity in the middle, right? And this cavity in the middle is known as bone marrow cavity. It contains yellow bone marrow. In epiphysis, there's bone marrow cavity, and that bone marrow cavity is filled with red bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow found in diaphysis of long bone is responsible for the storage of fat, while the red bone marrow, which is found in the epiphysis of long bone, is responsible for the formation of blood cells. That is, in adult, I repeat, in adult, the hemopoietic tissue is the red bone marrow. What's a hemopoietic tissue? Hemopoietic tissue is that tissue that shows hemopoiesis. What's hemopoiesis? It is the process by which blood cell formation takes place. So in blood, you have RBCs, WBCs, and platelets as the blood cells. And these three types of blood cells are formed in your red bone marrow. Okay, so now let's take a piece of diaphysis and zoom in. You'd see something like this. So there's a cylindrical structure, which is the diaphysis. So the diaphysis, from outside is covered by a protective layer known as periosteum, where peri means around or periphery, and osteum is related with bone. So it is the outermost covering of bone. From inside as well, there's a covering which is known as endosteum. Endo means inside, osteum is related to bone. In between these two layers, the bone that is present is none other than compact bone. So in diaphysis, you have compact bone, which is the first type of bony tissue that we are gonna deal with. Okay, in the middle, there's a cavity, which is the bone marrow cavity. Since it's present in diaphysis, it is filled with yellow bone marrow, which is responsible for fat storage. Okay, so in your compact bone, you can see several canals that run parallel to this yellow bone marrow. In the middle, there's your yellow bone marrow. Surrounding it is the compact bone. Inside compact bone, there are several tubes or canals that run parallel to this yellow bone marrow. Or these tubes or canal are vertical to the transverse section of that bone. What do I mean? So here's the diaphysis. Chop it. What you get is the transverse section. Perpendicular to this transverse section are these canals. So these canals are vertical canals, and they are known as haversial canals. What's their function there? So bone, it's a living tissue. It's made up of living cells. They require oxygen and nutrition to grow and multiply. So where do they get that oxygen and nutrition from? From blood. And these blood flow in blood vessels. So the supply of blood vessel and nerves to the bone is through these Haversian canals. So there are these Haversian canals. From inside these Haversian canals run blood vessels and nerves. So these are the vertical canals. These vertical Haversian canals are connected to other vertical Haversian canals with the help of your horizontal canals. And these horizontal canals are known as Volksmann's canal, which you could remember from the car brand Volkswagen. And that's just a way of remembering it. That's how I remember it. You can use any method you want. But the important thing is that you gotta remember the vertical canals are Haversian canals, and the horizontal canals connecting these vertical canals are Volksmann canal. Okay, why do you gotta know it? Because in second CEE, there was a question. The horizontal canals connecting the vertical canals in compact bone is, and that's your Volksmann canal. Boom. Okay, now let's look at the transverse section of this bone. Transverse section, there's your cylinder. Let's look at the upper portion of this cylinder. That's your transverse section. This is what it looks like. So outermost covering is your periosteum, and the innermost covering of your bone is endosteum. Periosteum. Okay, in the topic of white fibrous connective tissue, we have learned that white fibrous connective tissue is made up of collagen fibers, which are found in bundles, and they provide tensile strength. And where do you require tensile strength? In those places where protection is needed. What's the function of periosteum? It forms a protective covering around your bone. So periosteum is made up of none other than white fibrous connective tissue. Endosteum, on the other hand, it is made up of reticular connective tissue. We are done with white fibrous connective tissue, yellow fibrous connective tissue. Now let's look at reticular connective tissue in short. So here's a black box. I'm going to fill this with reticular connective tissue. So there are fibers, which are your reticular fibers, which are present in a mesh or net-like structure. They are like woven. They seem to be woven together. So they're present in a mesh or net-like pattern. And then there are your cells that form these reticular fibers, known as reticular cells. And they obviously lie on a matrix. So this is your reticular connective tissue, which forms the endosteum. Okay. In the middle, there's your bone marrow cavity, which is filled with yellow bone marrow. Surrounding that is your compact bone, which contains Haversian canals. So you can see various pores of these Haversian canals in the transverse section of the bone, of the long bone. Okay, so the bone which is present here is compact bone. Compact bone, it's a bony tissue. It's a tissue, that means it contains cells and matrix. Let's look at the different types of cells present in compact bone and the type of matrix present in compact bone. Okay, the cells first. Number 1, osteogenetic cell. Osteo refers to bone, genetic refers to stem cells. That is, these are the cells that give rise to other cells. What cells do they give rise to? They give rise to osteoblast. Second, osteoblast, where osteo means bone and blast means precursor cells. So these osteoblast cells, they give rise to bone cells, as well as they form the matrix of the bone, which is the bony matrix. Number 3 is your osteocyte, formed from osteoblast. Osteo means bone, cyte means cell, so these are the star-shaped bone cells. And finally, there's your osteoclast, where osteo means bone and clast means eating, destroying. So these are the cells that destroy the old osteocytes. So osteogenetic cells, they form osteoblast. Osteoblast, they give rise to osteocyte. Osteocytes, once they get old, get destroyed by osteoclast. Okay, next, matrix. The matrix of the bone is bony. That is, it is hard and compact, so-called compact bony tissue. It contains protein osin. Important. Protein osin is present. And number 2, it contains inorganic salts. The inorganic salts that are present are salts of calcium, which includes calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate. And that's it for compact bony tissue. In short, just the surface portion. The compact bony tissue, in the next lecture, I'll be showing you in detail by zooming in even more, and we'll see what's actually present in it, what makes up the compact bony tissue. Okay, that's it. I'm going to revise it quickly. So there's your bone. The long bone consists of 2 parts. There's your epiphysis and diaphysis. The diaphysis consists of yellow bone marrow and the epiphysis consists of red bone marrow. Let's look at diaphysis even better. In the middle, there's yellow bone marrow. Encircling the yellow bone marrow is the compact bone, which consists of vertical canals called Habersian canals, connected to each other with the help of horizontal canals called Volkmann canal. Let's look at the transverse section of this bone. We get the outermost covering, periosteum, and the innermost covering, endosteum. In between is the compact bone, which consists of Habersian canals connected to each other with the help of Volkmann canal, and in the middle there's the yellow bone marrow. Then the compact bone is a bony tissue which is made up of cells and matrix. The cells present are osteogenetic cells, which are the stem cells that give rise to osteoblast, which are the precursor cells that give rise to osteocytes, which are the bone cells that once get old, gets eaten up by osteoclast. And then there's your matrix, which is made up of protein osin and is compact and bony, as well as contains inorganic salts such as calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate. Whew, and we are done.